The cafe was filled with the sound of laughter, the clinking of cups, and the chatter of friends enjoying their time. In one corner sat a group of young men, all dressed in expensive clothes, speaking loudly as if the whole world belonged to them. Among them was Armin, a young millionaire known for his charm, pride, and endless confidence. He was the type of man who had everything: cars, luxury homes, and money that seemed to have no end. But one thing he never believed in was love. To him, love was nothing but a trick, a weakness that only simple people fell for. That afternoon, as his friends teased each other, the topic turned to relationships. One of his friends, with a mischievous smile, leaned closer and said, "Armin, you think you can win anyone, right? What if I give you a challenge?" Armin raised his eyebrow, curious but confident. "A challenge? For me? Go ahead." The friend pointed across the cafe to a girl sitting alone at a small table near the window. She was quiet, dressed simply, and had a stack of books beside her. She looked nothing like the glamorous women Armin usually spent time with. Her name was Meher, though Armin did not know it yet. She worked in a small bookstore and came here often during her short breaks, sipping tea while reading. "She looks boring," Armin said casually, taking a sip of his coffee. "Exactly," his friend replied, laughing. "She's not like the others. She won't fall for your money or your cars. I bet you cannot make her fall for you in 30 days. If you do, we'll admit you really are the king you claim to be." Armin smirked. To him, it looked like the easiest challenge ever. A simple girl with simple clothes, living a simple life. How hard could it be? He leaned back in his chair and said, 30 days? Fine. Watch me. She will be mine before the month ends. But what Armin didn't know was that this little game would turn his whole life upside down. Later that evening, he walked toward the window seat where Meher was quietly reading. For the first time in his life, Armin felt unsure of himself. Usually, women turned to look at him the moment he entered a room, impressed by his style and wealth. But Meher didn't even notice him. She kept her eyes on the book, completely lost in her world. Armin cleared his throat softly and said, "Hi, I think I've seen you here before. May I join you?" Meher lifted her eyes, surprised. She looked at him for a second, then back at her book. Her answer was short. "I prefer sitting alone." Armin was taken aback. No one had ever rejected his company before. He gave a small smile and said, "All right, maybe another time," and walked away. His friends, watching from across the cafe, laughed loudly. Armin's pride burned inside him, but instead of giving up, he became even more determined. The next day, he returned. This time, he brought a book in his hand, pretending to be interested in reading. He sat at the table next to hers, waiting for the right moment. Hours passed, but she barely noticed him. Finally, he leaned over and said, "I don't understand this author at all. You look like someone who reads a lot. Could you explain?" Meher looked at him again, a little annoyed. But seeing his book open, she sighed and said, "It's not so hard. The story is about patience and hope. You just need to feel it, not only read the words." Her voice was calm, simple, yet carried a strange strength. Armin listened quietly, for once not thinking about his pride or his bet. Something about her words made him pause. He smiled softly and said, "Thank you. Maybe I'll try again." That small conversation was the beginning. Every day after that, Armin found a new excuse to be near her. Sometimes he asked about books, sometimes about life. Slowly, she started replying, though always in short answers. Unlike others, Meher never asked him about his cars, his house, or his money. In fact, she seemed to care about none of it. She looked at him as if he was just another person, nothing more. And strangely, that bothered him. For the first time in his life, someone wasn't impressed by what he owned. She wasn't interested in his stories of travel or wealth. Instead, she spoke about her own world, her younger brother, her late father, and her dream of becoming a teacher one day. Armin, who had spent his life chasing money and challenges, felt a strange pull toward her words. At night, when he sat with his friends, they laughed and reminded him that it was just a bet. "You're almost there, Armin. Just keep pushing. Soon she will be yours." But in Armin's heart, something different was happening. He no longer thought of it as a game. The 30 days didn't matter anymore. All that mattered was the quiet girl near the window and the way her presence made him feel something he had never felt before. Nervous, uncertain, but alive. He told himself it was still just a challenge. Yet deep down, he knew his heart had already started a journey he never expected. And this journey was only the beginning. Days passed, and Armin kept returning to the cafe, sometimes with a book, sometimes with nothing but a smile. Meher was still distant, careful with her words, but slowly she began to accept his presence. She noticed that he always tried to start conversations, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes with strange questions, but never rudely. At first, she thought he was just another rich boy with too much free time, but his persistence made her wonder. One evening, as the sun set behind the glass windows, Armin sat near her again. He watched her flip through pages, her face calm yet serious. Finally, he asked softly, "Why do you read so much? Don't you ever get bored?" Meher closed her book gently and looked at him. "Books are my escape. They give me a world where problems can have answers, where pain can turn into hope. Life doesn't give that easily." Her words struck him. Armin, who had always lived with luxury, had never thought of life in that way. He had never needed an escape, because his money had always solved his problems. But her simple answer left him quiet for a moment. He smiled and said, "Maybe I should start reading seriously then. Who knows, maybe I'll find some answers too." For the first time, Meher gave him a small smile. It wasn't much, but to Armin, it felt like he had won something precious. His friends were watching from a distance, whispering and laughing. They reminded him that the bet was moving in his favor. But Armin no longer cared about their jokes. That smile from Meher meant more to him than any victory in their game. As days turned into weeks, Armin learned more about her. She worked at a small bookstore during the day and gave tuition classes in the evening. Her family depended on her income after her father had passed away. She carried responsibilities far heavier than her age, but she carried them with dignity. Armin listened to her stories silently, sometimes even forgetting to reply, just absorbing her strength. One evening, while they were walking near the cafe, Meher said something that shook him deeply. She pointed to a little boy selling flowers on the street and whispered, "Do you see him? That boy reminds me of my younger brother. I don't want him to end up like this, struggling on the streets. I want him to study, to have a chance I never had. That's why I work so hard. His future is my only dream." Her eyes filled with quiet determination. Armin looked at her, and for the first time in his life, he felt something he had never felt before: respect. It wasn't just about beauty or attraction anymore. This girl, who wore no expensive clothes, who lived in a small house, had a heart far richer than his entire fortune. That night, when he returned home, his friends gathered around him, laughing and teasing. "So, how's the bet going? Did she fall for you yet? Don't forget, the 30 days are almost over." Armin stayed silent. He didn't laugh, he didn't reply. Something inside him was changing. The bet that once excited him now felt dirty. The thought of using Meher's pure heart for a game made him feel guilty. He wanted to tell his friends to stop, but his pride held him back. He told himself he would explain everything later, after he had earned her trust. The next morning, Armin found himself waiting outside the bookstore where Meher worked. He had never done something like that before. When she arrived, carrying her bag and looking tired, he greeted her with a warm smile. "You look like you need some rest. Don't you ever take a break?" She looked at him with surprise. "Breaks are for people who can afford them. I can't." Her words were simple, but they cut deep into Armin's heart. For the first time, he realized how unfair life could be. He had wasted so much of his life on meaningless parties and games, while she fought every single day just to survive. Over the next week, he began helping her in small ways without letting her know. Sometimes he would quietly pay the cafe bill before she could. Sometimes he would leave small notes inside books at the store, writing lines of encouragement like, "You are stronger than you think." Meher found them and wondered who wrote them, but she never suspected him. Slowly, her walls began to soften. She started talking to him more openly. She shared her childhood memories, her love for old songs, and her dream of one day opening a school for children who couldn't afford education. Every word she spoke pulled Armin deeper. He felt as if she was opening a window into a world he had never seen before, a world of struggle, sacrifice, and hope. One evening, as rain began to fall, they walked together under a single umbrella. The streets were crowded, the air filled with the smell of wet earth. Meher laughed softly as the water splashed near her feet. That laugh, so pure and rare, echoed in Armin's heart. He wanted to freeze that moment forever. But even as he felt happiness, a shadow of fear grew inside him. He knew the truth. He knew that all of this had started as a cruel bet. And he knew that one day, if Meher found out, her trust would break into pieces. That night, as he lay awake in his bed, Armin stared at the ceiling, restless. The thought kept haunting him, was he falling in love, or was he still just playing a game? Deep inside, he already knew the answer. It was no longer a game. The days moved faster than Armin expected. What had started as a silly challenge with his friends had now become the center of his life. He waited for Meher every morning, he looked for her smile, and he listened to her words as if they were more valuable than any treasure he owned. But as his heart changed, time kept ticking. The 30 days were almost over. His friends grew restless. They had been watching his every move from a distance, sometimes even teasing him in front of Meher. Armin always tried to ignore them, but he knew sooner or later, their curiosity would turn into trouble. One evening, Armin and Meher were sitting in the park near her bookstore. The sun had almost set, and the air carried the sound of children playing. Meher was telling him about her father, how he had fallen sick when she was young, and how life had changed after his death. "I learned early," she said softly, "that life doesn't always give what you want. But I also learned that strength comes when you have no other choice. My brother was small then. I couldn't let him suffer, so I became both sister and father for him." Armin looked at her, his throat heavy. He wanted to tell her everything, that he admired her, that she had changed him, that he no longer cared about the bet. But the fear of losing her stopped him. He thought, maybe tomorrow. Maybe I'll tell her when I'm sure she feels the same for me. But tomorrow never waited. The very next day, as Armin entered the cafe with Meher, his group of friends was already there. They had been drinking, laughing, their voices louder than usual. One of them, jealous of the attention Armin was giving to Meher, decided it was time to end the game. "Hey, Armin!" he shouted across the room, smirking. "How's the bet going? Did the quiet little girl finally fall for you?" The cafe went silent. Meher froze. Slowly, she turned her head toward Armin, her eyes wide with confusion. "Bet," she whispered. Armin's face lost all color. He shook his head quickly, his voice trembling. "Meher, please, it's not what you think. Let me explain." But his friend continued, laughing cruelly. "Don't act so innocent, Armin. You made a deal with us. 30 days to make her yours, remember? And now look, you've done it. You're about to win." The words cut through the air like knives. Meher's eyes filled with tears, her body stiff as if the ground had disappeared under her feet. She looked at Armin, her lips trembling, but no words came out. In her silence, her pain spoke louder than anything. Armin reached for her hand, his voice desperate. "Meher, listen to me. Yes, it started as a bet, but it's not that anymore. I swear, it's not. But she pulled her hand away. The hurt in her eyes was unbearable. "So it was all a game," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Every word, every smile, everything, was a lie?" "No," Armin cried, his chest tight. It became real. You became real to me. I never wanted to hurt you. But Meher's tears fell faster now. She stood up, shaking her head. Trust is not a game, Armin. And you played with mine. With those words, she walked out of the cafe. She didn't look back, not even once. Armin stood there, surrounded by laughter from his so-called friends, but he couldn't hear them anymore. His ears rang with silence, his heart breaking with every step Meher took away from him. For the first time in his life, Armin felt powerless. No amount of money, no expensive car, no luxurious gift could fix what he had just destroyed. That night, he sat alone in his grand mansion, the walls echoing with emptiness. He remembered her smile, her laughter in the rain, her voice when she spoke of her dreams. And now, all of it was gone. He picked up his phone 100 times, wanting to call her, but every time he stopped. What could he say? How could he explain that something which began as a cruel game had turned into the truest feeling of his life? Would she even believe him now? Sleep refused to come. He walked through his house, past the expensive paintings, the shining cars, the endless luxury. None of it mattered anymore. For the first time, he realized how meaningless his world was without her. The next morning, he went to the bookstore, waiting for her outside. When she arrived, she looked at him once and then turned away, her eyes swollen from tears. "Meher, please," he begged. "Just one chance to explain." But she didn't stop. She walked past him, her silence sharper than any word. Armin followed her for days, waiting near her work, standing outside her house, sending messages she never opened. The more he tried, the stronger her walls grew. She had trusted him once, and he had broken it. And deep inside, Armin knew, he had lost the only person who had ever made him feel alive. The bet that had once made him laugh had now become the curse of his life. But somewhere in his heart, a fire was born. A fire to prove himself, not through games, not through words, but through actions. Because this time, it was no longer about winning a bet. It was about winning back the love he had almost destroyed. The days after Meher's departure felt like years for Armin. He had everything, wealth, cars, friends, fame, but nothing could fill the emptiness she left behind. His friends who once laughed with him now avoided him. The bet was over, but the victory felt like poison. The taste of betrayal lingered, and he hated himself for ever accepting that challenge. Every morning, he drove to the bookstore, waiting outside just to catch a glimpse of her. Sometimes, he saw her walk past him with her head lowered. Sometimes, she ignored him completely, her face cold and distant. Each time, her silence tore him apart. Armin had never begged anyone in his life, but for Meher, he was ready to fall on his knees. Still, no matter how much he pleaded, her heart remained locked. He had broken something fragile, her trust, and no apology could fix it. One evening, after another failed attempt to talk to her, Armin sat in his car and stared at the crowded streets. He noticed children selling balloons, flowers, and even wiping car windows for a few coins. For the first time, he really saw them. Their small faces, tired yet hopeful, reminded him of Meher's brother. He remembered her words, how she dreamed of giving children a chance at education, how she wished no child would suffer the way her family had. That night, something shifted inside him. If words could no longer reach Meher, maybe actions could. The very next morning, Armin visited the same street where children worked all day. He gathered them together and asked, "Would you like to study instead of working here?" The children stared at him, confused. Some laughed, thinking he was joking. But Armin's eyes held sincerity. He rented a small room nearby, bought notebooks and pencils, and hired a teacher. At first, the children were shy, but slowly they began to come. Armin also started attending, sitting on the floor with them, learning and laughing like one of them. Weeks passed, and the news of this strange rich man, teaching street children spread quietly. One evening, Meher, on her way home, heard laughter from a small room. Curious, she stopped and peeked inside. What she saw froze her steps. Armin was sitting on the floor with a group of children, holding a chalk in his hand, writing simple words on a blackboard. His expensive clothes were replaced with a plain shirt, his watch and car keys nowhere in sight. He was laughing as a little boy tried to spell a word, cheering him on with the patience of a teacher. Meher stood there silently, her heart torn between anger and confusion. She wanted to turn away, but her eyes refused to leave the scene. This was not the arrogant millionaire she had once met. This was someone else, someone trying to change. Armin noticed her standing by the door. For a moment, his heart raced. He wanted to run to her, to explain everything again, but he stayed where he was. Instead, he smiled gently at the children and continued teaching, as if to say, I am not here for her forgiveness, I am here because this is right. Meher walked away quickly, but her mind was restless that night. Was he doing this only to impress her? Or had he truly changed? She wanted to believe it was real, but her broken trust stopped her. Days turned into weeks. Meher kept seeing Armin's name connected with different good deeds. He donated books to schools, sponsored the education of orphans, and spent his time with people he had once ignored. Yet, he never once came to her to boast about it. He didn't force her to forgive him. He only kept proving, silently, that he was no longer the man who had made that cruel bet. One rainy evening, fate brought them face to face again. Meher was walking home when the rain poured heavily. She struggled to cover her books, but suddenly an umbrella appeared above her. She looked up, it was Armin. His face was wet, his eyes gentle, but he said nothing. He simply walked beside her, holding the umbrella. Finally, Meher broke the silence. Why are you doing all this, Armin? Teaching children, helping the poor. Why now? Armin looked at her, his voice low but steady. Because you opened my eyes. You showed me a world I never cared to see. You showed me what real strength looks like. I cannot erase the mistake I made, Meher. I cannot undo the bet. But I can change who I am. Not for a game. Not for you to forgive me. But because I don't want to live as that man anymore. His words sank deep into her heart. She walked in silence, unable to answer. Part of her still wanted to hate him, but another part of her saw the truth in his eyes. When they reached her street, Armin stopped. He handed her the umbrella and whispered, You don't need to trust me today. Maybe not tomorrow. But one day, if your heart allows, you will see that this is real. Then he walked away in the rain, leaving her standing there, holding the umbrella, her heart trembling with confusion. That night, Meher sat by her window, watching the rain. She remembered the arrogant man she had once met and compared him to the man who now spent his days teaching poor children. Could a person really change this much? Or was this just another trick? Her heart was torn, but somewhere deep inside, a small spark of hope flickered. Months passed, but Armin never stopped. Every day, he continued working with the children, funding their education, and spending time in the streets where people once ignored him. The arrogant millionaire who lived only for pride and parties was gone. In his place stood a man who knew the value of kindness, patience, and sacrifice. And though Meher kept her distance, she couldn't stop hearing about him. The neighborhood children often spoke of Armin Bai, who taught them to read. Shopkeepers mentioned how he quietly paid school fees for families who couldn't afford them. Even her younger brother, who had once looked at Armin with suspicion, told her one evening, He helped my friend with books. He didn't even say his name. People only found out later it was him. Meher listened silently. She wanted to stay angry. She wanted to remind herself of the pain he caused her. But her heart was softening, little by little. The man she saw now was not the man who once played with her trust. One evening, her brother came running into their small home with excitement. Didi, Armin Bai is organizing a small school for children who can't study. He asked me to join as a volunteer. Please say yes. Meher froze. Part of her wanted to refuse, but she saw the spark in her brother's eyes, the same spark she had always prayed for. With a hesitant nod, she agreed. The next day, she walked into the small school Armin had built. It wasn't grand, but it was filled with children's laughter. The walls were painted with bright colors, the shelves stacked with books. Armin stood at the blackboard, helping a boy with his writing. When his eyes met hers, time seemed to stop. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air was heavy with unspoken emotions. Then Meher broke the silence. "You did all this?" Armin nodded slowly, his voice calm. "With their help. And with your dream guiding me." Her chest tightened. She wanted to hold on to her anger, but the sight of those children, happy, learning, full of hope, made her heart ache in a different way. Over the next few weeks, Meher began visiting the school regularly, not for Armin, but for the children. Or so she told herself. She taught them songs, helped with lessons, and saw firsthand how much effort Armin put into everything. He never tried to talk about the past. He never forced her to forgive him. He only kept showing her through his actions that he had truly changed. One evening, after the children had gone home, Meher stayed behind. The sky outside was turning orange with sunset, and the room was quiet. Armin was cleaning the blackboard when she finally spoke. "Why didn't you give up?" she asked softly. "After everything, after I walked away. Why did you keep trying?" Armin turned slowly, his eyes filled with honesty. "Because you're the only person who ever saw me as more than my money. You're the only one who taught me what real love and strength look like. I lost your trust once, Meher. But losing you completely, that was unbearable. I didn't keep going to win you back. I kept going because you made me want to be better, even if you never forgive me." Meher's eyes filled with tears. She looked away, struggling with the storm inside her. All this time, she had prayed for someone who would stand beside her, someone who would understand her dreams. And here he was, the same man who once broke her heart, but also the man who had rebuilt himself piece by piece. She whispered, "Do you know how much it hurt? To find out I was just a bet." Armin's voice cracked. "It was the biggest mistake of my life. If I could erase it, I would. But I can't. All I can do is spend the rest of my life proving to you that what I feel now is not a game. It's forever." For a long time, silence filled the room. Meher closed her eyes, her tears falling freely. Her heart still carried scars, but she could no longer deny the truth she saw in front of her. People don't usually change, but Armin had. Not for show, not for pride, but for love. Slowly, she turned to him. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "People make mistakes. But not everyone learns from them. You have changed. And maybe I'm ready to give us another chance." Armin's eyes widened, his breath caught in his chest. "Meher, are you saying?" She nodded gently, a small smile through her tears. "Yes. But this time, no games. No lies. Only truth." Armin stepped closer, his eyes shining with emotion. He didn't rush, didn't grab her hand. He simply whispered, "Only truth. Always." And in that quiet classroom, with the setting sun painting the sky, their story found its beginning again. Not as a bet, not as a game, but as something real, something forever. The millionaire who once laughed at love had finally found it in the simplest of hearts. And Meher, who once believed her life was only about struggle, had found someone who would fight every battle by her side. Their journey had been filled with pain, betrayal, and tears. But in the end, it was also filled with forgiveness, growth, and love that was stronger than pride. The bet that began as a cruel challenge had turned into a love story neither of them could have ever imagined, a love that was meant to last forever.